Let's be honest, my father said across the dinner table. The house should go to your brother. He actually built a real life. The smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen. Silverware clinked softly against plates. Outside the window, the porch light buzzed with insects hitting the glass. My mother nodded like this had already been settled. You've always been less responsible, she added calmly. My brother Daniel leaned back in his chair with a small smile. Don't worry, he said. You'll land somewhere. For a moment, I just stared at the table. My hands were still wrapped around my water glass. They thought this conversation would humiliate me. What none of them knew was that the will had already been filed. My name is Kelsey Morgan, and I'm 36 years old. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, in a modest 2-story house my parents bought about 30 years ago. The paint was always a little faded and the wooden stairs creaked when you stepped on the third one from the bottom. But that house held every memory we had. Birthday dinners around the same scratched oak table, summer barbecues in the backyard where smoke from the grill drifted through the trees, snowy winter mornings when my brother and I would run down the hallway before school. My bedroom was the smallest one in the house. It faced the backyard and the old maple tree. That was where I spent years dreaming about writing books. Daniel, my older brother, always seemed more impressive to everyone around us. He had the confident voice, the steady job in construction, the big truck he polished every Saturday. At family gatherings, my parents would say things like, Daniel always knows how to handle things. I took a different path. I became a freelance editor. I helped writers polish their manuscripts and shape their stories into something stronger. Some months were great. Some months were tight. To my parents, that meant my life wasn't stable. Slowly, over the years, they began treating Daniel like the one who deserved everything. Family decisions revolved around him. His opinion carried weight. Mine barely landed. Still, I kept showing up. Birthdays, holidays, Sunday dinners like the one we were sitting at now. I wasn't rich or glamorous. But I had something they didn't expect. Proof that the story they believed about me was not the real one. If you have ever felt overlooked in your own family, hit that subscribe button. Sometimes the quiet ones are underestimated the most. Tell me in the comments if you have experienced something like that, and if you believe the truth always comes out eventually, click hype. Now let me tell you what led to that moment at the dinner table. It was a Sunday evening when my parents invited Daniel and me over for dinner. At first the conversation was normal. Small talk about work, the weather, a neighbor who had sold their house. The smell of garlic bread filled the kitchen. Then my father cleared his throat. I've been thinking about the future, he said. Daniel leaned back in his chair like he already knew what was coming. My father continued, I want to make decisions about the house while I'm still healthy. I assumed we were just discussing possibilities. Then Daniel spoke. Yeah, he said casually. We've already talked about this. I looked at him. What do you mean we? My mother folded her hands on the table. Well, she said gently, we think it makes sense for Daniel to inherit the house. The words felt like a sudden cold wind. Because he'll have a family to support someday. I blinked. I helped pay for repairs here, I said slowly. The roof 2 years ago, the plumbing, the kitchen remodel. My father waved his hand dismissively. That was help, he said, not ownership. Daniel shrugged. You chose a risky career, he added. That's not our fault. The room went quiet. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Then my mother said something that hurt even more. We always knew Daniel would carry the family forward. Daniel glanced at me. Honestly, he said, you'd probably sell the place anyway. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Because one thing they didn't know was already moving quietly behind the scenes. After that dinner, things got worse. Daniel started telling relatives that I was bad with money. At a family barbecue a few weeks later, my aunt pulled me aside near the lemonade table. She spoke softly. Sweetheart, are you doing okay financially? I realized Daniel had been talking about me. He was shaping a story where I was the irresponsible sibling, the one who couldn't manage life. My mother helped reinforce that story. At gatherings, she would praise Daniel loudly. He's the one who keeps the family stable, she would say proudly. and she said it right in front of me. People nodded like it was obvious. Then came the final step. My parents started planning house renovations with Daniel. New garage plans, kitchen upgrades. They removed me from the family message thread about the property. When I asked about it, Daniel laughed. "You're not part of the homeowner committee," he joked. I stopped arguing. Instead, I quietly prepared for something none of them saw coming. Because there was one person in the family who had always noticed the difference. My grandmother. She was my father's mother. And she had always believed in my writing dreams. When I was younger, she would sit in her living room with a cup of tea and read the short stories I printed for her. "Success doesn't always look traditional," she used to say. Before she passed away, she asked me to help organize her paperwork. Bills, documents, legal folders stacked neatly in a wooden cabinet. At the time, I didn't think much about it. Then months later, I received a phone call from a law office. My grandmother had updated her will shortly before she died. The lawyer said she had left something for me. It wasn't small. There was a financial trust, and something connected directly to my parents' house. The will was extremely specific, and it was scheduled to be read in court. My ally through all of this was Mr. Caldwell. He had been our family's attorney for decades. He handled my grandmother's legal affairs and knew the history of the family better than anyone. When he called me about the will, his tone was careful. "Your grandmother anticipated conflict," he said quietly. He explained that the will required an official reading with all family members present. Meanwhile, my parents continued acting as if their decision about the house was final. Daniel even started describing renovation plans to neighbors. "I'll knock out the old garage," he told one of them confidently. My mother proudly told people Daniel would soon own the house. They believed everything was settled. But Mr. Caldwell scheduled the will reading at the county courthouse. And suddenly the story they had been telling everyone was about to face reality. The conference room at the courthouse was quiet and cold. A clock ticked steadily on the wall. My parents sat across the table looking relaxed. Daniel leaned back in his chair like he expected the whole thing to be routine. Mr. Caldwell opened a thick folder and began reading. At first, the will sounded ordinary. Small gifts to distant relatives, donations to charities my grandmother cared about. Then he paused. He said my name. The financial trust my grandmother created was awarded entirely to me. Daniel shifted in his seat. Then Mr. Caldwell continued reading the final clause. Decades earlier, my grandmother had loaned my parents a large portion of the money used to buy their house. The loan had never been repaid, and it was legally tied to the property. The will transferred that outstanding loan to me. In simple terms, I now held the lien on the house. The room fell silent. Daniel stared at the papers. "That can't be right," he muttered. Mr. Caldwell calmly slid the documents across the table. "It is correct," he said. Suddenly, the house everyone assumed belonged to Daniel depended on one person. Me. I didn't celebrate. I didn't insult them. I simply looked at my parents and spoke calmly. "I'm not interested in revenge," I said. I offered a fair solution. "We sell the house and divide the remaining value evenly." For the first time in years, my parents looked at me differently. Not as the overlooked daughter, not as the irresponsible one, but as someone capable of standing on her own. Daniel said very little as we left the courthouse. And sometimes the person everyone underestimated becomes the one holding the final decision. Have you ever been treated as if you mattered less than another sibling? That kind of favoritism can leave deep scars. If you have experienced something similar, share your story in the comments. Subscribe if you believe fairness matters in families. Click hype to help this story reach others who need it. Standing up for yourself is not easy. If you have been there, subscribe and become part of our community. Let me know this story helped by clicking hype. And tell me where you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.